Hi, how you doing? This is George Herrera with the Queens Home Team at Keller Williams Realty. Today I'm talking about 5 things that you need to know about agency. So this is mainly geared towards Queens home buyers and 5 things that we think that you should know about agency here in Queens and in New York City in general. So starting with number one regarding agency, one of the most important things you need to know is that seller agents or listing agents, they work for the seller and in the seller's best interest. So if you go to an open house or you speak with a listing agent and you're speaking directly with the agent who's representing the seller, I'm sure you already assumed this, but they are working for the seller and in the seller's best interest. And their fiduciary duty is only to the seller. So there's no fiduciary duty that they owe to you as a buyer on one of their properties. All they owe to any buyer who isn't their client is just to deal honestly and fairly. But all their fiduciary duties lie to their seller, and as a result, they really can't do anything or say anything that would go against their seller or that would hurt their seller. So that's something important to know. So number one is that seller agents or listing agents, they work for the seller and in the seller's best interest. Number two would be that buyer agents work for the buyer and in the buyer's best interest. So you have seller agents, or sometimes called listing agents, and then you also have buyer agents. I'm sure you've come across this term. I'm sure you've seen it. Buyer brokers, buyer agents. What that really refers to is an agent who is representing a buyer, an agent who has been hired by a buyer to represent them, and so the buyer is their client, and as a result, buyer agents, they work for their buyers and on behalf of their buyer in their best interest. So they are not working in the best interest of the seller. They are only working in the best interest of the buyer. Okay, so number one, you know the seller agents. Then number two, you have buyer agents. Now, this is where it gets a little bit tricky and consumers get a little confused sometimes. Number three are something called broker agents. Now, broker agents are actually agents who are not the listing agent, but they also have not been hired by the buyer as their buyer's agent. Okay, so these are what the agents that are considered broker agents, and the way that the law is set up here in New York is that broker agents by default are working on behalf of the seller. Okay, so as a home buyer, as a Queens home buyer or a home buyer in New York, unless you have actually hired a buyer agent, hired an agent and signed a contract with them for them to represent you in your best interest, unless you have exclusively hired an agent to represent you, then any agent that you come into contact with is going to be working on behalf of the seller and in the seller's best interest. So they'll always be limited to what information they can give you and what they can do for you, because they cannot do or say anything that would go against the seller. Okay, so number three are broker agents. Okay, so if you probably won't hear this a lot, but you can just know that if you speak with a listing agent, then you're speaking to the seller's agent, if that's the agent representing the seller. Now, if you speak to another agent or another agent shows you a house, but it's not their listing and you haven't hired that agent, then that would be what's considered a broker's agent. And the most important thing that you need to know is that neither one of those would be representing you or your best interest. They would both be working on behalf of the seller. So seller agents and broker agents work on behalf of the seller, and buyer agents work on behalf of the buyer. Okay, fourth thing that you should know about agency is client versus customer. Now, this is something more on the back end in the realtor side, where we get trained on this and we have to be familiar with this because of the agency laws in New York. But it's something that's important for you to know also. As a Queens home buyer, as you navigate the market, as you start looking at properties, meeting with agents, you have to know that you're either someone's client or you're someone's customer. And what that means is that the only way you're a client as a buyer, the only way that you're an agent's client is if you hire that agent to represent you. Okay, so if I'm a seller and I hire a realtor to represent me to list my property, I'm their client. Okay, if I am a buyer and I hire an agent, I sign an agreement with them to help me find a place and for them to represent me and my best interest, then that is my buyer's agent. I am their client. Okay, now if you do not sign an agreement with an agent to represent you and your best interest, then you are a customer. Okay, so that's the easiest way to remember it. The only way you're a client is if you've actually hired an agent exclusively to help you accomplish your goals and to represent you and your best interest. If you haven't hired an agent, then just know that any agent you come into contact with, whether it's a broker's agent or a seller's agent, just know that you are their customer, and the fiduciary duties that agents owe to a client versus a customer are drastically different. So the fiduciary duties that an agent owes to their client is a lot. They owe loyalty, obedience, they owe disclosure. There's a lot of things that as a client that an agent is required to do for their clients by law. Now, as a customer, it's a lot more limited to what any agent owes you. So really, it's just dealing honestly and fairly, and not being deceptive, just being professional, ethical, things like that. But the fiduciary duties are definitely not the same as a customer than they would be as a client. You would not be getting the same high level of service or the same level of information, because as a customer, agents will be restricted in what they can tell you, versus as a client where an agent is required to tell you any information they have that can help your position or just give you more information, anything that's pertinent to you. Okay, so that was number 4, understanding the difference between client versus customer. Okay, and the 5th thing that you should know about agency is that buyer agents can share comps with you. Okay, broker agents and seller agents, they cannot share comps with you, meaning the recent sales in the area. So if you see a property that you like, you want to make an offer, one of the first things you want to do is you want to make sure that you do make the right offer. You want to make sure you don't overpay. It's always helpful to look at the recent comparable sales in the area to see what things have sold for, not what they've been on Zillow for or what they were asking, but what have things actually been selling for. And unless you hire an agent to represent you as your buyer's agent, a broker's agent and a seller's agent cannot share comps with you. They won't be able to give you any sales information. And if they did, the only comps they could share with you are the comps that would justify the price that they have on the property, or that the price that's listed for the property that you're going for. Again, because a broker's agent or a seller's agent cannot do anything that would go against the seller or to hurt the seller. And so if you really wanted to get a good idea of what a property's worth, will this property appraise, what offer should we make, where should we come in, then that's when it's really important that you have a buyer's agent, because without a buyer's agent, you will be going based solely off of whatever information you've gotten online, but you won't have the actual clear sales data which agents have access to. And as a buyer's agent, they would always be pulling comps for you because they're working for you and in your best interest, and their goal would be to make sure that you pay a fair price, that the property can appraise, and any issues like that, they're looking out for you the whole time. So their goal wouldn't be to make sure that you pay the most money. Their goal would be to make sure that you pay a fair price for a property that can appraise, so they help you negotiate to try to help you win the property that you actually want to get. But that's the 5th thing that you should really know about agency, is that unless you've hired a buyer's agent, chances are you aren't going to be able to get your hand on any comps or recent sales for the area or for the property that you're going for. Okay, so those are the 5 things that we think you should know about agency. Very important things. If you have any questions about any of these items, if you have questions about agency, or if you're in the market and you're looking for a buyer's agent to represent you, then feel free to reach out to us anytime. You can reach us directly through our website. It's very easy to remember, queenshometeam.com/help, and we'd be happy to assist you in any way possible. Okay, thanks for tuning in today. Take care and have a great day.